May you find clarity, peace, and a profound sense of purpose today and for the entire week ahead. And frankly, you are going to need that clarity today.
Oh, absolutely. We have a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, because today we are looking at how a single man eating a piece of fruit thousands of years ago supposedly doomed you. And, well, how the gruesome execution of another man is the only thing that can save you.
It is quite the entry point, I have to say, but it accurately captures the massive cosmic stakes of where we are heading today.
Right. So the mission for this deep dive is to unpack one of the most incredibly dense, mathematically precise, and honestly hope-filled passages in ancient literature. We're talking about the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans.
Specifically, chapter 5.
Exactly, chapter 5. We've brought together a stack of detailed theological commentaries and study Bibles that break down verses 1 through 21. And just to lay our cards on the table early, we aren't here to preach at you today.
No, not at all. We are here to analyze a comprehensive theological framework that has shaped, centuries of human thought.
And this specific text is universally considered this great watershed moment in Paul's letter.
Yeah, watershed is the perfect word for it. Up until chapter 5, Paul meticulously builds this legal framework about how a person is justified.
Like how they are declared legally righteous before God.
Exactly. But here, the text pivots. It shifts from the abstract doctrine of being legally justified to how a person actually lives out that reality on like a random Tuesday morning.
Okay, let's unpack this concept of being justified before we move forward because it sets the whole foundation. What exactly did this justification achieve in Paul's mind?
Well, in this theological framework, justification is a one-time, instantaneous forensic act. It's a legal declaration by God that happens entirely outside the person.
Hold on, I want to pause on that word forensic because
Wow.
in a modern context, when I hear forensic, my mind immediately goes to a crime scene.
Right, like CSI or something.
Yeah, I'm picturing yellow tape, blood spatter analysis, that whole thing.
That is a crucial distinction to make. In theology, forensics strictly means it belongs in a courtroom. It refers to a legal procedure.
So like a judge banging a gavel.
Precisely. A judge banging a gavel and declaring a verdict of not guilty. It is not a medical procedure where a surgeon goes in and fixes a defective heart. The framework insists there are no degrees of justification.
You mean you aren't like 20% justified one day and 80% the next based on your behavior?
Right. The gavel comes down and the legal status is changed permanently.
So from that single legal act in the courtroom, Paul outlines a series of cascading effects. The fruits of justification, which basically span 3 timelines, right? The past, the present, and the future.
Yeah, let's start with the past. The text says the result is peace with God. But the commentaries point out a nuance here that completely shifts the perspective.
Right, because this isn't a subjective feeling of tranquility. It's an objective change in relationship status. The enmity, the hostility between humanity and God is just gone.
Which is an incredibly important distinction to make, because human emotion is volatile. People might possess this faith, but still suffer from severe anxiety or stress.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I look at it like a formal peace treaty signed between 2 warring nations.
Oh, that's a good way to frame it.
Right. Like, once that treaty gets signed by the leaders, the war is objectively over. Now, a citizen living near the border might still be terrified, still waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Sure, their anxiety is very real.
Exactly. Their anxiety is real, but their feelings do not rewrite the treaty. The legal hostility has ceased.
That captures it perfectly. So the past timeline is settled, the war is over. Then Paul moves to the present timeline, describing it as having access to grace.
And the Greek word here is fascinating.
It really is. The word used in the original manuscript is prosagos, and it's a brilliant linguistic choice. It essentially means an introduction.
But not just like, hey, nice to meet you.
No. In antiquity, it was used in 3 highly specific contexts. First, it meant being granted a formal audience with a king or emperor.
Wow, okay. Royalty.
Second, it described a worshiper being permitted to cross the threshold into a holy sanctuary.
So ultimate sacredness.
And third, it was nautical terminology. It was used for a ship discovering a safe harbor in the middle of a violent hurricane.
Being brought into ultimate privilege, ultimate sacredness, and ultimate safety. I mean, that's a heavy concept for everyday life.
It really changes how you view the present moment.
Definitely. And that brings us to the future timeline, which Paul calls the expectation of glory. I was reading through our notes and found this anecdote about a Presbyterian minister named Miguel Gonçalves Torres that illustrates this beautifully.
Oh, yes, the deathbed quote.
Yeah, he was on his deathbed speaking to his wife, and he told her, "I thought that when I died, I would go to heaven, but it was heaven that came to fetch me."
It perfectly embodies the text's assertion that this expectation is not just wishful thinking, it's a guaranteed arrival.
So it's not a question mark.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The future isn't a question mark in Paul's framework. It's a confident anticipation of sharing in the radiant splendor of God.
But wait, if someone is operating within this framework, right? Like if they have this royal access, this absolute safe harbor, and this guaranteed glorious future, why is their life still so difficult?
That is the natural follow-up question.
Yeah, why is there still tragedy and pain? This logical tension leads directly into what has to be Paul's most counterintuitive claim in the entire letter, which is finding joy in suffering.
We have to trade very carefully here because Paul is not advocating for masochism. He's not suggesting you become an emotionless stoic who seeks out pain for the thrill of it.
Right, because that would be incredibly unhealthy.
Absolutely. The framework argues for finding joy in the results of the suffering, not the suffering itself. And the linguistic roots unlock the meaning here. The word translated as tribulation or suffering comes from the Latin word tribulum.
Which is the threshing board, right?
Yes, a tribulum was a heavy wooden board studded with sharp metal spikes or jagged stones. Ancient farmers would drag it over harvested grain.
That sounds incredibly violent.
It does, but the purpose wasn't to destroy the grain. The purpose was to separate the valuable wheat from the useless chaff. The immense pressure and the spikes did the necessary work of purification.
So Paul is arguing that tribulation acts like that threshing board on human character. It triggers this chain reaction.
Right, the text says tribulation produces perseverance.
And the Greek word he uses for perseverance is hupomone. I love this word because it doesn't mean passive surrender.
No, it's not just gritting your teeth and surviving a beating.
Exactly. It means a triumphant, active conquering of trials. And then that active perseverance produces character, or in Greek, dokeim.
And dokeim refers specifically to a metal that has been tested in a furnace and proven to be pure and strong.
The mechanics of that are fascinating to me. It's literally like forging a steel blade.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Because think about it, you can't just pour liquid metal into a sword-shaped mold, let it cool off, and expect it to hold an edge in battle.
Right, the first time you hit a shield, the blade would just shatter.
Exactly. To make a weapon that won't break, a blacksmith has to repeatedly plunge it into a searing fire, pull it out, and strike it with a heavy hammer over and over.
It's a brutal process.
It is. That process literally beats the weakness out of the metal and aligns its molecular structure. The fire and the hammer aren't destroying the steel. They are giving it a character that won't snap under pressure. That is dokeim.
And Paul's argument is that this forged character ultimately produces hope. But, from an analytical standpoint, this raises a massive red flag.
Wait, really? What kind of red flag?
Well, how do we know this entire chain reaction isn't just a psychological coping mechanism?
Oh, that is the exact question I had. How do you know you aren't just convincing yourself it'll all be okay just to survive the trauma?
Right, because forging a sword sounds poetic until you realize you're the one getting hit with a hammer.
Yeah, is this just blind optimism?
Paul actually anticipates that exact critique. He argues this hope is valid because it is anchored in an objective historical event that unequivocally proves God's love. It's not a fleeting emotion.
So it's grounded in something real.
Exactly. The text uses the imagery of the Holy Spirit pouring out love. Commentators compare it to a sudden, copious rainstorm falling on dry, parched, cracked earth. It's a total inundation.
And the framework insists this love is completely unmerited. Like, Paul builds this dark crescendo detailing the human condition to prove this. He uses 4 specific descriptors for humanity.
Let me guess, they aren't flattering.
Not at all. He calls humanity weak, ungodly, sinners, and finally, enemies.
That progression is very deliberate.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Paul intentionally contrasts human love with this divine love. In human terms, we can comprehend someone sacrificing themselves for a truly good, noble person.
Sure, like a soldier jumping on a grenade for their squad. We understand that instinct.
Right, but dying for someone who is weak, who is actively sinning against you, who is literally a sworn enemy trying to destroy you, that completely defies all human logic.
It shatters human logic.
Right.
And this leads to what many theologians consider the ultimate paradox of this system.
Okay, what is it?
Culturally, people often assume that Christ's death on the cross is what convinced an angry God to finally love humanity. But Paul argues the exact opposite.
Wait, so the cross is not the cause of God's love?
No, it is the result of it. God didn't look down, see a sacrifice, and suddenly decide to be loving. God loved the very objects of his wrath, and that pre-existing love produced the sacrifice.
Wow, that fundamentally shifts the perspective. And Paul uses a classic logical argument from lesser to greater to solidify the point, right?
He does. The logic basically goes like this. If God did the absolute hardest work imaginable, sacrificing himself for his sworn enemies, he will certainly do the comparatively easier work of saving his newly reconciled friends from final judgment.
Because if he paid the ultimate price for you when you hated him, it defies reason to think he would abandon you now that you are at peace with him.
It mathematically secures the hope. Now, having established this immense unmerited grace given to an individual, the text pans the camera back.
We're zooming out.
Yeah, Paul moves from the microscopic view of individual justification to a macrocosmic view of human history, because the lingering question is, how did humanity become enemies in the first place?
Right, and logically, how could the execution of just one man, Jesus, possibly fix a broken relationship for billions of other people?
To answer that, Paul introduces the tale of two men, Adam and Christ. And the commentaries are adamant on this point. This theology treats Adam as a literal historical figure, the first man and the federal head of humanity.
Because if you treat Adam as just a myth or an allegory, Paul's entire theological structure collapses. You cannot balance a mythological Adam on one side of the scale against a historical Jesus on the other.
Exactly, and this sparks a fascinating historical debate. Back in the 5th century, a British monk named Pelagius argued that Adam's sin only affected Adam.
So, like, it was just his own problem.
Right. Pelagius believed that the rest of humanity is born neutral, and we simply imitate Adam's bad example by choice. But Paul's framework vehemently rejects that view. He argues for organic solidarity.
Organic solidarity. So the concept is that the entire human race was literally genetically in his loins when Adam fell.
Yes. When he rebelled, we all rebelled.
One of the commentaries quotes the poet John Donne here, which captures organic solidarity perfectly. He wrote, "No man is an island. Never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee."
It's all about how deeply interconnected we are.
We really are. But I have to admit, when I first encountered this concept of federal headship, my immediate reaction was to reject it. It feels incredibly unfair.
Oh, you are definitely not alone in that.
I mean, why should I inherit a broken, corrupt nature for something a guy did thousands of years ago in a garden? I wasn't there. I didn't vote for him to represent me.
It is the single most common objection to this doctrine. How does federal headship translate into a concept a modern person can actually accept?
The best parallel I could find is geopolitical. Think about a modern president or a prime minister who has the constitutional authority to declare war on another nation.
Okay, I follow you.
When that leader signs the declaration of war, every single citizen in that country is suddenly at war. The citizens didn't individually hold the pen, they didn't sign the document.
Millions of them might vehemently oppose the war.
Exactly. But because of their representative, their federal head, the entire nation is plunged into the conflict. They inherit the devastating consequences of their representative's action, regardless of their personal choice.
That is the exact mechanism Paul is describing. And he provides theological proof for this organic solidarity by pointing to the era in history between Adam and Moses.
Because before Moses received the law at Mount Sinai, there were no explicit written commandments like "thou shalt not steal."
Right. People weren't breaking a specific codified rule in the way Adam broke the explicit rule about eating the fruit.
Yet people were still dying.
Precisely. Why did death still reign over humanity if there was no specific written law to break? Paul's answer is that death reigned through their inherent solidarity with Adam.
So sin and death are inextricably intertwined in this system.
Death is the coin that sin pays with. Because humanity was tied to Adam's rebellion, humanity received the payout of death, even before the explicit law existed to condemn them.
Which brings us to the pivot of the entire chapter. If Adam's representation plunged humanity into a war we didn't ask for, how does Christ's representation get us out?
Paul sets up Adam as a type or a foreshadowing of Christ, because they both acted as representatives for the many, but then he aggressively highlights the contrast.
Because Christ achieved much more than Adam ruined.
The much more is the defining theme here. Look at the stark contrasts. First, their core motivations were entirely opposite. Adam acted out of pure selfishness.
And the Greek word used for his action is paraptoma, right?
That would mean a deviation, slipping, or falling off the right path to serve oneself. Christ, conversely, acted out of complete renunciation. The word for his action is charisma, which means a freely given grace gift, selfishness versus sacrifice.
I found a brilliant analogy for this in the study notes that explains the difference in magnitude between what Adam did and what Christ did. They compare it to a forest fire.
Oh, that's a powerful image.
Yeah, lighting a dry forest on fire with a single match, that's Adam's sin. It is incredibly easy for one person to start a massive disaster. But putting out a raging continent-wide inferno and then restoring the burned forest to life, that's Christ's work.
It requires infinitely more effort, power, and grace to fix the devastation than it did to start it.
Exactly. And that difference in magnitude dictates the final results. Because of Adam, Paul says death reigned like a tyrant over humanity.
But because of the much more of Christ, the reign of death isn't just politely swapped out for a gentle, peaceful kingdom. It is replaced by the reign of life.
So believers don't just survive the transition. Paul says they become kings who rule over death. The victims become the victors. Okay, but I've been trying to do the math on this grace concept, and I just can't get the equation to balance. So what does this all mean? Over the thousands of years of human history, billions upon billions of human sins have piled up. Mountains of cosmic debt. How does one single act of obedience by one guy on a cross outweigh the billions of acts of rebellion by everyone else? The scales just don't add up.
That is because you are trying to do quantitative math, but Paul is presenting a qualitative equation.
Okay, walk me through that.
The framework insists that the infinite divine value of the giver Jesus Christ infinitely supersedes the vast quantity of the human debt. You aren't weighing one human's actions against billions of humans' actions.
Ah, I see. You are weighing the rebellion of billions of finite created beings against the infinite worth of the Creator himself.
The scale breaks. Grace completely overwhelms the sin.
So if grace is this mathematically overwhelming, what was the point of all those strict rules given in the Old Testament? Why did the same theology spend centuries obsessing over the law of Moses?
Paul addresses that directly. The law was never meant to be a cure. It was a diagnostic tool, a magnifying glass.
But how does a law actually do that? Just listing a bunch of rules doesn't inherently fix anything.
Think about human psychology. If you put a sign on a wet bench that says, "Do not touch," what is the immediate human impulse?
Oh, you want to touch the paint. Everyone does.
Right. By putting a strict, impossible law like "do not covet" in front of humanity, it didn't prevent the desire. It actually triggered human rebellion.
It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that humanity's core issue wasn't just a lack of good rules, but a fundamentally broken nature.
The law provoked the disease to show how terminal it was, proving they could never fix it themselves. But as Paul's famous phrase goes, where sin abounded, grace superabounded.
The tsunami of grace washes over the mountain of sin that the law finally exposed. It really is an incredible, cohesive journey when you step back and look at the whole architecture of chapter 5.
It truly is.
I mean, we started in this cosmic courtroom where we were enemies, crushed under the tyrannical reign of death because of the selfish choice of the first man, Adam. And through this intricate, legally binding, yet profoundly loving mechanism, we receive an unmerited, superabounding grace.
A grace that doesn't just pardon us, but actually allows us to reign in life through the sacrifice of the second man, Jesus Christ.
The transition from absolute condemnation to complete justification, from death to life, is totally comprehensive in this framework.
There are no loose ends.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over. Something to explore on your own that builds on what we've analyzed today.
Always good to leave them thinking.
Right. So, if this theological framework is true, if our organic solidarity with Adam meant that we inherited a broken nature, a propensity for selfishness and condemnation, without consciously choosing it in the beginning, and if our solidarity with Christ offers us this overwhelming justification and grace entirely through faith, how should that fundamentally change the way we view the flawed people around us?
Oh, that is a profound question.
When you see the deepest, most frustrating, most destructive flaws in your family, your coworkers, or even your political enemies, are you seeing them merely as isolated individuals making terrible, selfish choices?
Or, looking through the lens of Romans 5, should we see them as victims of that first federal head captives in a war they didn't start, who desperately need an introduction, a proselyte, to the second man who can set them free?
It completely changes the landscape of how we judge others. We step out of the courtroom of condemnation and back onto the threshing floor where grace does the real work.
It's a beautiful way to apply a very dense theological concept.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the text. We have reached the end of our time today, so we will say goodbye for now. And remember, God blesses all the listeners. Take care.